The work, it's really about the process of making, and it comes from that object-based. I'm dealing with how things feel and, you know, their weight and texture, as well as how they look, and it's quite a bodily process. So that is where the work really is for me. That goes hand in hand with sensuality. A lot of enjoyment with making the work comes from using really bright, exciting colours, and sometimes it even keeps you awake late at night in the studio using bright yellows. To start with, I used mist tinted paint from the hardware store, and I just used the colours that were available, and that was quite a nice way of limiting down my options so that I was more free and not always having to determine everything about the work, because I was working very experimentally with the shapes and with what the object itself was doing. When I'm working, I would usually be making a body of work for an exhibition. I always think of every show as one whole, and your body is part of the work as you move around the space. Having a huge piece and a tiny little piece together and talking to each other across the space gives the whole a lot more dynamic. I think of them as maybe larger paintings that have been squished down or melted down or deflated into tiny little paintings, and also a lot of painting history sort of stuffed into them as much as possible. And they just come out of the studio process because they're dried paint from the bottom of the tubs, and seeing what that does when I stack it on and then painting over it again. So they sort of come from an idea of using absolutely everything in the studio and not taking anything for granted, and noticing what the materials do of their own accord. Even the flat ones have that sense of playing with space, even if they're just super flat, and they're still talking about depth or lack of depth. This work's called Tumbler, which I thought it looked a little bit like looking through a whiskey glass or something, looking through the ice cubes, and the way that would move the view behind the glass, just the movement of tumbling. A friend told me once that in order to help with names, it was good to have a rule to apply to all of the names, and I kept that in mind, and then I stumbled upon the ER on the end of words, which makes them sound like verbs and makes you think about movement but also about people. I think the ER titles give the work some human character traits.